This passage is about coronation ceremonies that happen in England from the past, comparing it with the modern practices. Let's quickly read the passage and summarize it before we look at the questions. The book English Coronation Ordines in the 9th and early 10th centuries, edited by David Pratt, collects the earliest surviving rites for the coronation of Anglo-Saxon kings. In a year when Britain will witness a coronation, so this passage was written before King Charles's coronation. In a year when Britain will witness a coronation for the first time in decades, it makes interesting reading. As Rosalind Love says in her preface, the words of this May's coronation show only a distant echo of the early rites. So, this coronation is very different from the early rites. But the shape of the ceremony overall can only be understood in the light of the ancient orders. The words may be different, but the shape of the entire ceremony can be understood if we know what happened in the past and what was the procedure or process followed in the past. Some aspect of these ceremonies certainly look very different from what we will see in May. So there were certain aspects of the coronation ceremony in the past, in the ancient times, which are very different from what will happen. This, as I said, was written before King Charles's coronation. What would have happened in King Charles's coronation? In the earliest rites, the king wore a helmet rather than a crown, but Anglo-Saxon kings too were presented with a sword and a ring. That means Charles was also presented with a sword and a ring, and Anglo-Saxon kings also were presented with a sword and ring, and promised to maintain law and justice in their kingdom. What is the similarity? Sword and a ring being presented and the promise being the same. What is different? Earlier, Anglo-Saxon kings wore helmets. The present king during coronation wears a crown. The prayers and blessings are rich with biblical allusions, means biblical references, some of which survive into the modern ceremony. Prayers and blessings have biblical references. Some of these prayers and blessings are there in the modern time too. As the king was anointed, Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, anointed Solomon the king was sung. This song was sung then, admittedly in Latin and to a less rousing setting than Handel's. At the end of the ceremony, the congregation cried, Vivat Rex, long live the king, and all came to kiss the king. This was the process. This liturgy, public worship, or something like it, was used at a significant Anglo-Saxon coronation. He's giving us an example of a coronation that happened exactly 1050 years ago. On May 11, 973, King Edgar was crowned in Bath in a ceremony which made a deep impression on contemporaries. The event was so significant that it is commemorated in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, unusually with the poem. Then the author of the passage mentions the poem. The historian poet who recorded this event had an ambitious sense of scale, placing the blessed day into a larger context of time and history. So the person who wrote it was a historian. He was also a poet because he wrote this poem. He says, the historian poet, the author of this passage says, the historian poet who wrote this or who recorded this event had this ambitious sense of scale, because he put this coronation day in a larger context of time and history, not something that happened. He put it in a larger context of time and history. Reckoning up the date, 973, the poet goes even further back. At that time of the glorious king, at that time had passed 1000 winters in the count of reckoning from the birth of the glorious king, guardian of lights, except there were left a tally of winters 7 and 20. A riddling way of saying it was 973. 1000 minus 27. A year whose proximity to the millennium seemed to this poet meaningful. 1000, a millennium, and this was 973, very close to the millennium. So now the authors comment. Perhaps he would get equally excited about 2023, 2 decades in the other direction. That was 27 years before the millennial year, and this is 23 years after the millennium, 2000, another 1000 winters further on in time. The history of liturgy encourages thinking about time on a big scale because it deals with rituals which are both stable and constantly changing. So when you look at history of liturgy, he says that is very relevant when you think of time on a big scale. These liturgies have rituals which are both constant and changing. In what way? Provides a script of words and gestures full of meaning, which may be repeated over many generations, haloed by history. So it provides a script of words, gestures, and all these are full of meaning. These words and gestures are repeated over generations. So that's how history of liturgy works. However, the script is always being tweaked and adapted. Words are there, gestures are there, but the script is constantly being changed, tweaked, and adapted. It only comes alive in the moment of performance. Even if the words stay the same, the people who say and hear them are different. So the particular context of any ritual creates different meanings every time. The person who heard the words and gestures in 973, the person who hears it in 2023 hears it in a different context, and it is the context that creates a different meaning every time. Such ceremonies offer an intersection between the timeless and the immediate, history and the present moment. So the author basically is praising such ceremonies and the continuity, the history that the richness in history that they represent. This is the summary of the passage. Let's now look at the questions. Based on the passage, all of the following are true about liturgy and rituals, except the last part of the passage talks a lot about liturgy and rituals. So let's see which ones all are true except. There's one option which is not true, which we have to identify. Liturgy provides a script of words and gestures full of meaning. Yes, that has been given. Rituals are influenced by immediate context. Correct. The script of rituals remains unchanged as the words remain the script. No, he says the words remain the same, but the script is tweaked and adapted and changed. Therefore, that is not correct, and therefore that's our answer. Right? So the correct answer is C. All of the following, if true, would weaken the idea that the history of liturgy encourages thinking about time on a big scale. So basically it says the history of liturgy has such a rich history that it encourages you to think about time on a very big scale. Which one would weaken it? The ones which would strengthen it or support it are ones which deal with the history of liturgy. Which one would weaken it? One which dissociates history from liturgy. The historical context of liturgy is largely unknown and undocumented. Okay? Even as history is undocumented, that does not mean that there is no history or history doesn't have significance. The liturgy has lost its cultural and societal significance over the years. Liturgy has lost its culture, but that also goes back into history. This was its culture, this was its significance, was very important earlier, not important. But still, the sense of time is there. Modern interpretations of liturgy disregard its historical roots. If they disregard its historical roots, they are not looking at the history of liturgy, then the scale of time does not make sense. Because you are disregarding history. The moment you disregard history, the concept of time, how far back it is dated, is not there. Therefore, the correct answer is C. Which of the following can be inferred from the sentence? Perhaps he would get equally excited about 2023, 2 decades in the other direction from another millennial years, another 1,000 winters further on in time. The historian. He is talking of the poet historian. He says perhaps he would get equally excited about 2023, another year very close to the millennial year, That's what he's saying. So let's look at which one can be inferred. The historian poet was equally excited about 2023 as he was about 973. Do you think the historian poet is still alive to be excited about 2023? The historian poet was equally excited. He has documented the history of 970. He was equally excited, he didn't say. Perhaps he would have been equally excited. He would get equally excited about 2023. Doesn't mean he was or is excited, right? The year 2023 is another millennial year similar to 1973, 973. How is it similar? A cannot be inferred, B also. The only similarity is its proximity to the millennial year. That is, in this case 2000, in that case 1000. And the poet was getting excited about it. The poet historian was getting excited about the date of the coronation so close to the millennial year. That does not mean that the year itself was significant or similar. So B cannot be inferred. The historian poet had a fascination with significant years that mark milestones in time. Yes, because of which he kept talking about the millennial year and 973 being so close to the millennial year. So C can be inferred. The year 2023 holds historical and cultural significance similar to 973, except for the fact of the coronation. We can't say anything else was similar. Therefore, option C is the correct answer. Which of the following cannot be inferred from the passage? 3 can be inferred. We have to look at the option which is out of context or contradicts the passage. The historian poet who recorded King Edgar's coronation had a deep appreciation for historical and cultural significance. True. He talked of the age, he remarked on the time, he remarked on how close it was, right? The historian poet who recorded King Edgar's coronation was a contemporary of King Edgar. I can write the history, Mughal history now also. I don't have to be a contemporary of Babur to write Mughal history. So there's nothing in the passage which says that he was or implies that he was a contemporary of King Edgar. He wrote the history. He documented the history. He wrote a poetry about the coronation. He might have chosen other sources. Right? So 2 cannot be inferred from the passage. Let's quickly look at C and D. The coronation ceremonies of Anglo-Saxon kings influenced modern coronation ceremony, and there are quite a lot of commonalities too. True. Modern coronation ceremonies in Britain preserve some of the rituals. He says some of the rituals are carried on even now. That means they preserve it. Therefore, that also can be inferred. For my correct answer is B.